Welcome back, everyone, and we are with a really outstanding team of experts in juvenile delinquency and trauma-informed care. It is my pleasure to introduce first our Judicial Commission on Mental Health staff attorney, Molly Davis, who is our excellent, extraordinaire moderator of our panel. Molly Davis has been a staff attorney for the Texas Judicial Commission on Mental Health since 2020. Prior to joining the JCMH team, she served as a prosecutor in the Tarrant County Criminal District Attorney's Office for 12 years. Ms. Davis was assigned to the Juvenile Division for 6 of those years, handling over 2,000 juvenile cases as lead counsel, the majority of which were serious felonies involving matters of mental illness, competency, and complex trauma. She is board certified in juvenile law by the Texas Board of Legal Specialization since 2017. Ms. Davis is a frequent speaker on juvenile law and mental health topics. Our panelists include Judge Stacey Mathews, who is one of my best friends on the bench and a really great colleague to bounce things off as we go through this journey together. She was appointed as judge of the 277th District Court in Williamson County, Texas in 2013. In the 277th District Court, Judge Mathews presides over felony criminal cases and serves as the presiding juvenile judge of Williamson County and chair of the Juvenile Board. As Juvenile Board chair, she oversees the Williamson County Juvenile Services Department, which has become the preeminent model for trauma-informed care strategies in juvenile justice. Judge Mathews is also the founding judge of the Transformative Justice Program, a pretrial diversion program for justice-involved young adults. Matt Smith, who is here to my left, is the Assistant Executive Director for the Williamson County Juvenile Services Department in Georgetown, Texas. He is a certified juvenile probation officer and a licensed professional counselor supervisor. Mr. Smith began working in juvenile justice in 2001 with the Texas Youth Commission at Brownwood State School. He has worked for the Williamson County Youth Behavioral Health Task Force. Mr. Smith is a founding member of Resilient Wilco, a local initiative focused on educating the community about the impact of adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. And as you can see, he started when he was 16 at the Texas Youth Commission. Right. I mean, really, Matt, it's rude. All right. Dr. Greg Sumpter is currently the Assistant Chief of the Grayson County Department of Juvenile Services. He has been in public service and worked with youth and families for almost 30 years. He is a member of the Motivational Interviewing Network of Trainers as well. Mr. Sumpter is a trust-based relational intervention, TBRI, practitioner. In the past several years, he has ventured out into writing and publishing a few books, one on the history of juvenile justice, and the other a mystery novel around real-life social justice issues, which I have just downloaded on Amazon. You're welcome. His most recent book, this is really groundbreaking. His most recent book involved creating a new theory of leadership, need-based leadership, influenced by TBRI and motivational interviewing. That is groundbreaking. Welcome, panelists. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we've just spent probably like 12 hours learning about trauma. So who wants to take the first question? What is trauma-informed care?
So I'll give it a shot, and I definitely don't want to rehash what we've learned. We've learned a lot about trauma today, but I think in the context of our discussion today, in the context of what is trauma-informed care in juvenile justice, one, it's about an awareness of the prevalence of trauma in the juvenile system. The large majority of kids that enter our system have significant trauma histories. I'll share with you in Williamson County, 2019, we looked at our residential kids, and 83% of those residential kids had 4 or more ACEs. So that's compared to 16% in the original study. So one is learning about the prevalence of ACEs in juvenile justice. 2 is what we've been talking about, is how that affects kids' brains, neurodevelopment, biology, belief systems, and behavior. And 3, I think most importantly to our discussion today, is that our systems, our juvenile justice system, our school discipline system, our mental health system, our CPS system, if we're not aware and trauma responsive, that we can do even more damage. So that I think is what trauma-informed care is in the juvenile justice context.
Great. And is trauma-informed care a framework that works only with children, or can we try this out with grown-ups?
So I'll take that one since I deal with both populations. As Judge Willis said, I have a felony criminal docket with adults, and I have a transformative justice docket, which is 17 to 24-year-olds that are justice involved that we divert. And they do it's more community service based, and all of our caseworkers in that program are getting trained actually as we speak on TBRI. So we're extending it up. It doesn't just because you've had trauma, and I'm going to use Miss Toon here. I actually wrote down things she said. You were very inspiring earlier. She didn't get through some of the trauma till she was, and deal with and address some of that till she was an adult. So having a trauma approach, hopefully we look at it with our kids, and we look at it with our juveniles when you're in the CPS system or when you're in the juvenile justice system, and we can address that. The more we know, it seems like we're doing a better job of that. However, there are a lot of adults that weren't in those systems perhaps, or the education system in that time didn't know what we know now. And so I see one of the things we've done in Williamson County is anybody that goes on probation, they're given the ACEs to determine where they are. And so our probation officers can look at what are we dealing with? What are we, what is their trauma? So we try to incorporate that into the adult courtroom as well. So we'll see. We're trying.
I'm glad to hear that. I do have a specific question for Matt. Matt, it's my understanding that you brought the idea of trauma-informed care to Judge. And where did you get it from?
Sure. So really, we didn't know anything about trauma-informed care, the terms, ACEs, any of that until about 2013. And this is a story of kind of community collaboration, but our county had an established mental health task force, and when I became director of mental health services for the department, I got to be a part of that task force. And so our local mental health authority, Bluebonnet Trails, received a grant from DSHS, and it was a National Child Traumatic Stress Network was involved. And it was to train the community in what is trauma-informed care and what is childhood adversity. And so for myself, many of my colleagues in juvenile, really everybody that attended, it was for the first time an awareness of, hey, these are when we go to do home visits and we see the chaos, this is what the science says about that, and this is some new terminology. And so it was through that grant that we began learning about what trauma-informed care was. And then some of what you see up on the screen, from that point on, we just started to dig into everything we could find to help us understand about ACEs. And so a couple documentaries, Resilience and Paper Tigers. We brought in a local equine program that does natural lifemanship, which is an equine-assisted therapy for kids who've experienced trauma. They brought horses into our detention yard and trained us up. And learned from the Search Institute out of Minneapolis, Minnesota about protective factors for kids. And so we were doing a lot of this training and really kind of training our staff over and over and over, different modalities. And one of them came up to me one day and said, hey, Mr. Smith, we understand it, we get it. We understand that these ACEs impact kids' brains and their neurodevelopment, and that's why they behave the way they do. We don't know what to do with that. And one of them even wrote, when we brought the horses in, they said, hey, we don't work with horses, we work with children, wrote that on their evaluation. So at that time, I went back to that same task force and I said, hey, this is what we're looking for. We need some sort of framework or system to work with these kind of kids, with kids that most of the kids that are in our system. And so then I was referred by a couple agencies to the Karen Purvis Institute of Child Development. And that was in 2016. And so I was able to go down to Austin and see a one-day overview and with the Karen Purvis staff, TBRI one-day overview. And I listened to them that day, and it clicked in my head, this is exactly what we need. This is the framework that my staff are asking for. And so that began our journey. Came back and talked to Judge Mathews, talked to our chief, Scott Matthew, and we started the process of figuring out how we could bring TBRI and trauma-informed care into our system.
Okay. And Judge, what was your response to that pitch?
So I loved it. My background is I was a teacher, and I was a special education teacher before I went to law school and became a judge. And so I love just the concept. I love the enthusiasm. Of course, Matt Smith can sell you anything. So be careful if he approaches you. But it was just, for me, it was everything that I thought we should be doing. It was individualized. It was really looking at the deeper root. It was addressing families. When I first became the juvenile judge, I had lunch with Scott and Matt and said, we're not helping families, we're helping kids, and they're going right back into the same environment. And this was an extension of how do we work, we're bringing families in, we're training everybody. I mean, from the receptionist who answers the phone to my bailiff, to everybody's getting trained, speaking the same language, and we're requiring parents to really participate so that they're managed. Some of them are managing their own issues, and some of them they're understanding how to deal with they're talking the same language we are, and we're working as a team. And the other part of this was Matt really was so involved with our school districts and puts on a big training every year for our school districts, that this was going to become part of their training. And so for me, I saw this as this is collaboration. It fit everything we'd been looking for. And so I got excited, jumped on board. I'm not nearly as trained as Matt and the staff, but I went to some trainings to learn to try to implement as much as I could into the courtroom.
Okay. And spoiler alert, it works. But I'm going to let them get into that in a minute. Greg, you and I worked together in Tarrant County. How did you find out about trauma-informed care?
Yeah, so I've worked 22 years in Tarrant County, and in 2006, I was a drug court supervisor and began to notice that a lot of our youth who had substance use issues had mental health issues. And so got really involved in the local mental health connection, a collaborative that started from the Wedgwood tragedy here in Tarrant County, and just organizations throughout the county who are coming together to say, how can we get people easy access to care? How can we make it so that there's no wrong door? One of the things that we started doing right around that time is some learning communities to say, particularly with adolescents, what are some of the areas that we need to improve upon, that we aren't meeting that easy access, no wrong door. And one of those was trauma-informed care. And so we started looking at lots of different initiatives within Tarrant County. And then I'd established a relationship with Matt, who maybe is a good salesman, but 2012 around motivational interviewing, actually, and then later learned that Williamson County was one of the first to bring TBRI. And then also an unrealized or untapped potential that, hey, Karen Purvis Institute is in my backyard in Tarrant County, so maybe I should reach out to them. So that's part of my journey.
Great. Now I would like to know, each of the three counties here, Greg, you're two, Matt and Judge Mathews, you're Williamson County, but how did you overhaul your systems to incorporate trauma-informed care into them?
You can go first.
Sure. For us, as a part of our relationship with Mental Health Connection, one of the things we looked at was early on, as soon as it was released, National Child Traumatic Stress Network put out Think Trauma. And so in Tarrant County, we trained all of our staff in Think Trauma. Also, as a part of that connection with Mental Health Connection, Kenneth Ginsberg, Dr. Ginsberg, came in and we looked at how do we look at reaching teens, something that he had put together. How do we train our staff in that to be a little more responsive? So we trained all of our staff there. And then eventually, when we got to the place where we were training TBRI, before I left Tarrant County, we really kind of trained up one unit, our mental health unit, in what does it look like to be trauma responsive, asking those same questions that Matt talked about asking. So we know what trauma-informed care, we feel like we're really good there, but how do we respond as a result? And then, so it wasn't long after that, I've been in Grayson County, I think Saturday will be 4 years. And so I got to Grayson County. When I got there, actually Judge Brian Gary, the 397th District Court judge, had already sent 2 Child Protective Service workers to be TBRI practitioners and sent 2 juvenile justice staff to kind of influence what that looked like in our county. How do we become trauma responsive? And so 2019, not long after I got there, we trained all our staff in TBRI, and it's a journey, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, but we're still on it. We're not where we want to be, but that's part of where we're at.
And I would say very similar to Greg's story. The first thing we did was get together as a leadership team with Judge and our executive director and our leadership, and we made a commitment, and we said, look, if we're going to do this, we believe in it, we're going to go all in. It's going to be comprehensive. So we held a couple of meetings with our staff and prepared them for that and said, we're about to start a journey together and learn TBRI, and that is going to be our framework we're going to work from, and we're going to stick with it. And we're going to it's going to take us some time to learn it, and we're going to fail, but we're going to stick with it. And we just ask that all of you kind of partner with us and be a part of that journey along with us. And so we had to, similar to what Greg said, it's hard to do that comprehensively throughout a department. So we had to stage it, and we began with our residential services. We have a post-adjudication residential treatment program. So we started there. We sent a bunch of folks off to practitioner training. They came back, and they started training a lot of our staff. And so practitioner training through the Care and Purpose Institute is their highest level of training. It's a week-long training you go to, and you're pretty much immersed in it. And it's Greg's a practitioner, so he could tell you this, but it's life-changing, both for that individual and about how you do your work. So the goal was, once we got our own practitioners back, they were able to then train our staff. And the key there was they were able to translate a lot of TBRI, the concepts and the language, into the juvenile justice world. Because most of the research and training prior to us being involved with Care and Purpose Institute was done in the foster care and the education system. So we were a little bit of the pilot for Care and Purpose Institute. The other thing we had was we had a lot of support from Care and Purpose Institute. So they came on, did focus groups with our staff, got to know our environments, and helped us kind of adapt TBRI into the juvenile justice world. And they've stayed with us on that journey ever since 2016. But after that, I think the key things we did, just to keep it brief, was we focused on these 3 pillars of trauma-wise care. Felt safety. Do the kids feel safe with us, both physically and emotionally? Not do we think they're safe, but do they actually feel safe? And self-regulation, coping skills. So, if you really think about the offenses and the behavior that leads kid to juvenile justice, it's a lack of an ability to self-regulate, and that is a byproduct of the trauma and the brain development. And then the key thing for us, though, was that middle one there, connections. So what the science says is that the key to resilience is kids becoming connected, as we've heard from the personal stories today. Kids connected with their passion. So we have a process where we connect kids to their spark, is what we call it. Every single kid, no matter their offense or their diagnosis, when they come in, it's one of the first things we try to do, identify their spark. It's usually athletics, music, or the arts. But we have all kinds of different sparks, and if we can get them engaged in that activity, we see a lot of success. The other big piece to connections is just connections to our staff and connections to healthy adults that are outside. And so one of the aha moments, I think, in we just kept mining for this, right? Where can we find places to increase felt safety? How can we connect kids better to healthy adults in the community? How can we proactively teach these skills, these self-regulation skills? And so we did things like nurture groups, which is a TBRI concept where you teach skills. You have kids get dysregulated in a fun way, and then you have them use the skills. But it's not enough to just do that in a once-a-week group. So we then began, let's incorporate this skill development into the education process. Let's incorporate this skill development, how to regulate when you are leaving the gym after basketball and going to the cafeteria. And so the more we learned about it and the more we started to see success, we just kept mining for these three things and ways to increase felt safety, self-regulation, and connection.
Well, thank you. A specific question for Judge Mathews. How has the court experience changed since this implementation?
So it really has been a journey and a process. And for me, what I wanted to focus on was should the courtroom look like in this construct, right? And so I'm probably, I don't know if I'm unusual, I walk through the detention center and our residential facility regularly. I have a courtroom out there, and so when I'm out in court, no one ever knows when I'm going to come out, and I pop in and I walk around, usually with Matt or Scott, and it was really eye-opening for me to see. I watched how are the staff interacting with the kids? What terms are they using? What techniques are they using? What kinds of things are they doing that are successful? And I talked to the kids and I asked them. I asked lots and lots and lots of questions, and so I think how I viewed the courtroom was I needed it to be a place out of those things. Self-regulation is really important, and kids are not regulated often when they come to court, when they are in detention and they want to go home and they're going to have a hearing and they're going to have to hear some things they don't want to hear, or they, their parent didn't show up and they're having to deal with that and those kinds of things. So we worked on things, really some basic things like a therapy dog coming and being in the detention part, not in the courtroom. They could be, but being in the back with them while they're waiting for their case to be called. And interestingly, the woman that we were having come, she loved all of this, and so she started making connections and relationships with the kids. So they liked seeing her as much as the dog. And then just things that were basic. What are their comfort zones? Like if I see a kid that I know or attorney says, so-and-so is not going to be real happy, I try really hard to just make that connection. Every single kid, look them in the eye, talk to them. We don't talk about their case. One of the things I do is I ask them questions about their skills. I have learned so much about breathing. 4-square breathing is my favorite. But and try to get them so that they're really comfortable from the beginning when they walk in. It's very informal. Court can be very formal when it has to be, but I just know that it's more successful and we have a better experience when we start off from that connection. So I just tried to start implementing things that I was seeing them do and using some of those same terms and really asking the kids to teach me. What is it about court that can help you? What is it you want to see? Asking them about what mattered to them. And again, I'm going to point out Ms. Toon, I'm sorry, but she said, what changed for her was when people treated her with dignity and respect and that she mattered. And then I think right after that, we had Luann Southern talk about the number of kids, and it's some staggering number that believe that they don't matter. And so that for me was really affirming as I sat back there today, because the one thing I try to make every kid feel like is that they matter. Their case matters, they matter. And so just being able to do that to me it's so simple. It's not like I'm doing some magical anything. It's that connection, helping them feel like they matter, asking them lots and lots of questions, finding out interesting things about them. We used to have, if a kid got released on conditions of release, we used to just sign and let them go home. Not anymore. They have to come out and see me. And I talk to them. Tell me about school. What do you like? What don't you like? I bring them books out. Oh, you like to read? Great. Here's a book. Those kinds of things. And so I think for me, that's been, I've just learned from the experts and from the kids, to be honest. The other thing that I think that I've seen where it's made a difference is back in, I see the slide, 2017, one of my colleagues who does CPS, we coordinated, and I'm going to say we did a conference, but Matt Smith did a conference that we did, and it was for CPS caseworkers, attorneys, and I required the entire juvenile bar to attend. If you wanted to be on the appointment list, you had to come to the conference, and that became part of our indigent defense plan. It's still in there. You had to. Now it's on video, and you have to watch it. And we brought in experts to talk about trauma. We did a whole section on, as a lawyer, how do you use some of these things? Like, what does that look like for a lawyer? What does that look like for a judge? What does that look like for not a person that's used to being trained in counseling or in therapy? A lot of lawyers say, I'm not a counselor. Well, we're going to teach you how to be one. And so we did that. It was a 2-day conference. We did brain science, we did substance abuse, and we did a whole section on trauma-informed care. And so what happened was our juvenile bar speaks the language. Our prosecutors, you could not do this if you had a state that didn't. Well, I'm very, very fortunate that the prosecutors have bought in and they believe in it, and they use some of the same tools. And so I think for me, court has just, it doesn't even look the same as when I started.
I love hearing all this because you're so right. Dignity and connection, that costs nothing, and anybody can do it.
Yep.
Switching though, I've got a question for Greg. What is motivational interviewing, and what role does it play in trauma-informed probation services?
Okay. And I came to motivational interviewing first. I learned about it in about 2007 and became a Mint member in 2010. Bill Miller, Stephen Rolnick in the late 70s, early 80s were looking at a different way of working with individuals who had addiction issues. And they'd seen the confrontational style that had been there, and so they created a different way of being with individuals. And the way they would probably describe it now, they would say maybe a motivational conversation would be a better title, but they're too far in to change it. So motivational interviewing is a practical way to talk with someone about change or decision making. And the key element is by eliciting their own motivation and strength and commitment to making that change. So it's not about me, the individual, having the conversation. It's me being curious about the individual who might want to make a change. And so that's kind of what motivational interviewing is. And I would say 3 things about it that I think tie in nicely to trauma-informed or trauma-responsive care. One of them is the research. It's a very widely researched methodology or intervention. And one of the things that has come out of the research is if, take for instance, if you did a group work with motivational interviewing and you did CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, both of those, the research says, have great outcomes. If you combine them, so MI with something else that you do well, makes the outcomes for both even better and for the individual even better. And so that's one, is the research suggests if you combine MI with trauma responsive care, you're probably doing better than just doing one or the other. And then there's a framework that's, I think, similar to TBRI, particularly as a responsive approach. It's a mindset and heart set, is what they call it in motivational interviewing, around a couple of stances that you just take when you meet with individuals. One of those stances is partnership, that this is a together thing. Another stance is a stance of acceptance, not agreement with the way someone is behaving, but an understanding that that's where they're at in this moment. So acceptance. So Ms. Toon, they talked about you saying some things. Some of the things you said really struck for me. You said, I hung on to those morsels of connection when I got them, but I didn't get them a lot. And then I think you even slowed down the word when you said dignity, that somebody finally showed up in that way. So acceptance is also about absolute worth of another individual. So treating them with dignity. Compassion, a stance of compassion, not an emotion, but I'm looking out for the best interest of the other individual. And then evocation is that part. I think they're about to write Motivational Interviewing, the 4th edition, and they're going to call it empowerment. Not that I have power to give you, but I'm going to help you draw out the power that is within you. And so it's not about me downloading or lecturing or instilling something. It's about looking at empowerment. And so that way of showing up, I think, is similar in TBRI, just the way you show up with other individuals. And then lastly, so you have a framework of TBRI, but motivational interviewing is a way you have conversation. So another thing we heard, I think, from Dr. Lepore, from Ms. Toon, from others is, let's dig in a little bit. Let's not stay on the surface. And so this is a way to have a conversation about different things that might be challenging where we dig in a little bit. So those are things I would say.
Great. That actually sounds similar, not the exact same thing, but similar to finding somebody's spark. This kind of sounds expensive. Like, I've looked at the prices at the Karen Purvis Institute. How do y'all pull this off with so many probation officers, so many court staff, so many detention officers that you have to train?
So the cost to be a practitioner is $3,500 per person. So it is expensive. It's well worth it, and really they ought to charge more for what you get. But it's cost prohibitive. We partnered with Karen Purvis Institute. And so they really helped us out with sending a bunch of practitioners year one, and helped us be able to afford that cost. We did not increase our budget in any way. Some of us that go to conferences like this had to do less of that year, so that we could really funnel most of our training budget to TBRI. So we prioritized that. But what the Karen Purvis Institute does afterward is brilliant. So once you're a practitioner and you have gone back and trained your own agency, and really gotten good at training, then they invite you to come mentor other agencies. And so we kept adding practitioners every year who would then become mentors. And when you go mentor another agency, then they give you an additional practitioner spot. So they barter with you that way. So it could be an initial upfront cost, was not for us, but after you invest in the years to come, as long as you can retain practitioners who help mentor other places, it just builds and builds and builds. And so we now have 12 practitioners within our department that work in different areas that we've sent over the years.
And I would just say, Think Trauma is a free resource that's out there. So there's scholarship options. Even when I went on a scholarship where my cost was $1,000. So still expensive, but way cheaper than the $3,500 to go, and so more palatable to my agency as well. And then there's lots of, and now that we have YouTube and everything else, you have all kinds of opportunities to look and see and learn from others. So part of what I did early on when I found out about what Wilco was doing was go and learn from them.
And there are a lot of great materials and resources under this session, under the materials, so check it out. There's stuff there from Think Trauma, which everybody's mentioned, and also the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. Those are all fabulous, and a lot of them are offered free of charge. But give us the numbers. How many fewer days in detention do your kiddos experience? How many fewer out-of-home placements? How many fewer commitments to TJJD?
Okay, so want to show some of our outcomes, and before I get into them, want to just explain that when we transitioned to TBRI in residential, we were coming from a very different model. It was not a boot camp, but it had a military discipline structure along with some therapeutic services. So we saw some immediate outcomes, which are what we were looking for, that were drastically different. So in a 6-month study looking at comparing our military model with the new, our new program is called CORE. We saw huge decreases in youth grievances filed, 83%, 93% reduction in suicide watch. That spoke to felt safety, kids feeling safe. 31% decrease in physical restraints, and then a lot more kids completing the program successfully. That was really what we were mining for. Before TBRI, we had the military structure and expectations that kids were going to fall in line or they're going to go back to court and move on down the line. we realized through our training that we have to play the long game here. This trauma is not going to heal itself. It's going to take years to kind of catch back up what they've lost. But what we found was that when we were able to provide that kind of environment and framework, that kids did much better. So some of that increase in completion was really just staying with kids through their struggles until they got to success. The other outcomes we saw, we implemented trauma-informed care, TBRI, in community supervision, kids on field probation. And we started to see a lot fewer cases returning to court for violation of probation. So it went from 86 cases in 2016 when we started down to 26 cases in 2019. And that's been a continued trend. We don't include pandemic data because it's so skewed. But we're continuing to see successes like this. TBRI in the community looks a little bit different. So it's not as much about behavior management in the moment. It's about connecting those kids to their spark and connecting those kids to their families and connecting those kids to outside resources. So, but definitely saw a lot of progress in field services. And using TBRI, prior to it, I described kids were failing our program, would go back to court. We would have to place them outside of the county or commit them to TJJD if they failed. So as you can see here, we saw a huge reduction in the need to place kids outside of the county. We were able to serve almost all of our kids in our residential program. So we went from 44 youth and a budget of $386,000 in 2014 all the way down to 44,003 youth in 2019. So really started keeping kids closer to home, which is what all the research says works best. Same thing with commitments, and kudos to Judge Mathews, because we would sometimes recommend commitment, and she said, no, we're not ready for that yet. Y'all keep working with them. And so we historically have not had lots of commitments to TJJD, but you can see here all the way down to one commitment in 2019. That particular kid begged Judge Mathews to go to TJJD. He had kind of exhausted everything. And so the attorney got in her ear, and she allowed that one reluctantly. But it's just a testament to how well TBRI has worked for us, and also the leadership of our juvenile judge in holding our feet to the fire and saying, if we're doing TBRI, we better have better outcomes than sending a bunch of kids to outside placement.
And I want to just add something to that. When the expense of this, and I know that's hard and people ask all the time, we're very fortunate. We have a Commissioner's Court that has been very generous with our budget, but we also, we go and show them this. We tell them, look, this is what you're saving, right? In 2014, we were spending $350,000 on placement. We're spending under $50,000 now. So that's a whole, imagine how many practitioners you could have, right? So I think for y'all, so if you think about it as you're looking to plan on how can I pay for this, think about some of those arguments that you can make to, and you know, they want data, right? People want to show, and sometimes you don't have it yet, but it's a matter of that. Trust us, we're going to bring you, give us a year, give us 2 years, what, you know, give us, and I can't, because I know you're going to hear some really good stats from Grayson County. I think if you use, and you know, that's just something as a suggestion, use some counties that have already done this to go make your pitch to whoever it is that holds your purse strings.
And I'll just say about our data, I'm not happy to show it because it's not where I want it to be yet. But we see things trending in a great direction. And I don't know how busy it looks on the slide. So which one is this, Matt?
Pre-adjudications.
Pre-adjudication. So we have a detention center as well. So I'll just kind of throw out a number or so. So we had grievances of 105 in 2018. We started this in 2019. And so year to date, that was of last Friday, October 27th, we had 19 grievances in our detention center. Okay. And this is not causation. We think TBRI is a big part of what's driving our numbers. Obviously, the pandemic. We didn't start until 2019, so we only have kind of pandemic numbers to show. So that's one I'll show there. But I think just across the board, we did, even doing this, our physical restraints are up a little bit, but they've been trending down But now we can dig in because we have the data to figure out what's going on there. The next one is which one? Post. So we have a post program, about 48 boys on average. That's been up and down a little bit over the years, all male. It was a pure boot camp when it started. It came in 1997 out of some of the super predator language we talked about. Build a post, build a boot camp. The outcomes of just doing punishment, that model is a failure model, as Dr. Lepore told us. And so we've been kind of coming up out of that. But in our post number I'll feature is disciplinary seclusion. 2018, we had 899 incidents of disciplinary seclusion. Year to date, 2022, we have 140. So not where I want it to be, but quite a reduction. And the next one is probation. A couple of things I'll just point out there. In 2018, we had 129 kids of Grayson County that were put into detention. Year to date, we have 54 that have been put in detention. Our technical violations are down considerably, where we modified one year to date, and we had 18 2018. Our DPPs, our court-ordered supervisions, are significantly down, almost half. And then I didn't put this on the data, but I noticed Wilco had this as well. So we don't commit a lot of kids. 2019 seemed to be our high year. I don't know if people were rebelling against new people coming in and talking about TBRI, but we had 5 commitments. We average 2. Year to date, we have 0. And then our post numbers, kids we were sending to our facility and other places where there was cost. 2019, we had 28 kids placed. We had 18 secure kids. This year we have 8 secure kids, so a savings of $350,000 over that time.
Same thing.
And better treatment.
Wow. You said it's really not where you want it to be, but that's pretty good. So what are the current challenges that your counties are facing with implementing trauma-informed care? Is staffing one of those things?
Yeah, I think, and I assume almost everybody in the room would agree with this, but staffing shortages have made things more difficult. And so it's not about TBRI, it's not about any other trauma-informed framework. Pretty much everything right now, as we all know, in life and in our workplace and what we do is more difficult when you don't have as many staff. I think, Dr. Lepore yesterday at the end of the day spoke to this as well, but the other big challenge, and I really liked the way he positioned it, is I think some in our field and some that don't know much about trauma-informed care do see it as being permissive, when in fact it's not at all. It's about being attuned with that individual that you're working with and really focusing in and catching things low, and making sure there's lots of structure and there's lots of routine, and that kids feel safe in those routines. And so I think those are the 2 challenges that I see are being staffed well enough to do as much as you'd like. You can still do things when you're short-staffed that make a big difference for an individual, but also just making sure that we're getting the right information out about what truly is trauma-informed care in the juvenile setting.
And that was a challenge that we've had with our staff, and I know, we want to love them, right? Just want to love them, but you've got, what does a good parent do? And I think Dr. Lepore yesterday said high structure and high nurture, and that's what kids want, right? I mean, you raise your own kids. They need that structure, but they need it done in a connected, nurturing way. And so I think we've had to work through that ourselves, and even as a judge, right? I want to do this. I want to jump in there and do the same thing, but there still has to be structure. It's still the courtroom, and so figuring that balance out, I think, has been a challenge that we're working on.
And the only thing I'd add, because those have been our challenges as well, so maybe it's more of a lesson learned. If you're going to teach your staff how to show up for people, you need to figure out how to show up for your staff. So that's a lesson that we've kind of learned, and a challenge that we're working through. But yeah, how do we show up for our staff?
That's great.
That's great.
We don't have much time left at all, just 30 seconds, but we're going to be out at the speaker table answering questions for a few minutes after this. I've always been told never meet your heroes because you're going to be disappointed. Y'all, not disappointed at all. Thank you.